Hey everybody, this is my thoughts on Tales of Maj'Eyal. At least I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly, but anyway, this is an open source roguelike that started development back in 2009 and it's still got stuff being made for it to this day. In fact, as I'm making this video, they are about a week out from releasing their new expansion pack, which is called Embers of Rage, the first expansion pack being Ashes of Uruk. I do not have either of those at the moment. So what you're seeing here is the base game, and in fact the developers contacted me about this one, asking if I would like to cover the recent release that they put out, which is version 1.4, although that was at late January, so they have actually put out a couple of interim patches to lead up to the release of their new expansion pack, which is coming out on the 23rd. So even since they got in touch with me and were like, hey, would you like to take a look at this, it actually has changed up a bit. So if you're wondering what specific version I am playing in this, it is actually version 1.4.3. So this definitely is a very active project, and they are putting out updates at a pretty good pace, so very much appreciated. And it's also very much appreciated that they sent me a copy of the game to take a look at, because I tend to look at the vast sea of roguelite and roguelike games on Steam and just kind of go, I don't know if I'll ever pick that up or not, because there's just so many of them out there right now. If you're wondering what this one is like, it's definitely a roguelike through and through. It's a turn-based game, it's tile-based, you have randomly generated loot and randomly generated levels to some degree. There's permadeath, all sorts of things like that. But it's definitely a thoroughly modern example of the genre because they have difficulty settings that are much more lenient on the player, allowing you to just kind of come back from having a full-on death as opposed to just instantly dying. You had to restart the whole thing. So it's definitely a lot more accessible than some of the older school stuff like, say, Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup or something like that, where it's just a straight-up roguelike through and through. The only difference from the old-school roguelikes is that it doesn't use ASCII graphics. This one doesn't use ASCII graphics either, as you can see. In fact, it uses 2D sprite work, which is pretty well done, actually. It's certainly not the absolute best artwork I've seen, but as far as roguelikes go, it's on the upper end of the spectrum, and it being so bright and colorful actually helps out quite a lot. They do have some other touches here and there as well, like the amount of aura effects that you'll see and such like that actually do spice up the visuals quite a bit, because there really isn't all that much in the way of movement on the screen. Your sprites just kind of jiggle around a bit as they move along and as they attack, but you're not seeing any significant animations or anything like that, so it can be a rather static affair, which is why the special effects do tend to help quite a bit. Apart from that, there's really not all that much to talk about on the visual side of things. I mean, the interface itself is pretty clean and easy to work with, and it's actually customizable to a degree. What you're seeing in this is just the default setting, just so you have an idea what it looks like from the get-go. But you can actually mess around with it if you want and make it a bit easier to work with. Although there are still some oddities here and there that you need to get used to, like having to click outside of a window in order to actually be able to get out of a menu. The menu will pop up and it will, just for example, the inventory screen. That will pop up and it will actually pop up in the center of the screen. And if you click outside of that, the screen will go away and you go back to your actual game instead of just being in your inventory. But that does take some getting used to. It's fairly intuitive, but again, you just have to get used to it because not very many other games do that sort of thing. Now, apart from the visuals, the sound design is fairly decent for what this is. I mean, I don't really expect too much out of roguelikes as far as their presentation goes. They are historically an extremely simplistic genre, and the presentation usually reflects that. The sound design here is pretty much the same way. You've got pretty utilitarian sound effects that honestly aren't really all that great, and particularly when you get into combat, it just doesn't really have a lot of oomph to it, so it's really a very utilitarian way of doing the sound, and it's pretty much what you expect from the vast majority of roguelikes that actually do incorporate sound, because a lot of them don't. And when you get to this one, the sound effects themselves feel like they were thrown in there to actually just have sound effects rather than have them be an integral part of the game. The music is a bit similar in that respect. It does have music throughout the game, and it is rather simplistic fantasy music, but it does fit the game all right, and it's definitely a lot better than the glorious sounds of silence. But it does feel a bit odd at first when you go into a dungeon and it's playing this rather somber music and you're just running around slaughtering whatever gets in your way, so at times it feels like the music just doesn't really fit the action that's going on. But again, it's alright music and it's better than nothing. So the presentation overall ends up being something that's not really all that hard-hitting and not really all that memorable when you get down to it, but at the same time, it works well for what the game is, and what it is a roguelike. Now granted, it's a more modern interpretation of a roguelike, which actually means it has a plot, although I have put about an hour and a half into this game, and I can't really tell you what the plot is, because none of my characters really last that long. I don't really get all that invested into roguelikes, so I don't really play them all that seriously. I just kind of mess around with them just to have some slight fun here and there. I really view them more as a time waster than anything else. But if you do manage to get into the plot, there is actually quite a bit of lore that you will find in the world that will tell you about different things about the actual world of Ayal, and why things are the way they are, and what the actual significance of the plot is, and everything like that. So there's definitely more to it than simply going into the dungeons, whacking stuff until it dies, getting the loot, maybe selling the loot if you ever get to a shop, and eventually beating the final boss. They do have a final boss in this game, and they do have numerous dungeons that you go through, and you slaughter everything inside them in order to get the loot and everything like that. But they do introduce other aspects to the typical roguelike formula apart from simply the plot. They also have a bunch of side quests that you can go on, of which there are numerous that are pretty much randomly generated, and there are some that are not really randomly generated. And these can actually lead you to unlocking different things. Now, if you get to the randomly generated ones, normally that means you'll get a certain item, or you will be able to increase your stats or something like that. But when you get to the other side quests, some of them actually unlock things for your account as a whole. So you'll actually find that there is a reason to do the side quests instead of simply looking at them as, oh, free experience points or something like that. Some of the quests will unlock certain classes for you to play on new characters. Others will unlock new races for you to play as new characters. And there's all sorts of other unlockables as well, like talent trees, and even campaigns that you can unlock in addition to the normal Age of Ascendancy campaign that you start with. So there is incentive to go off and do the side quests and complete all the various things that you can complete as best you can anyway. And so it is a bit more involved than your typical roguelike, which is a simple dungeon crawl. You go into the dungeon, you whack a bunch of stuff, you get some loot, you continue. In this case, it pretty much encourages you to go off the beaten path and try different things and just mess around until you find some cool stuff to unlock and just cool things to fight and things like that. Of course, there is one really nasty problem with that. If you don't like roguelikes and you don't like that core gameplay loop, you're not gonna like this game at all. No amount of ease of use where this game can be controlled entirely by the mouse if you really want to, or accessibility options like the lower difficulty settings and things like that, is going to change the fact that this game gets very repetitive very quickly. And if you don't like that core repetition loop, then you're not going to get anything out of this. It's really that simple. Does that mean it's a bad game? No, it's actually a rather well done roguelike with quite a lot of content and a rather easy to use interface, as well as the interesting addition of no consumables, unlike in most other roguelikes where you will find things like potions and such. In this one, not so much. And instead it relies a lot on special abilities that you unlock as you go through the game and level up your character, and of course select the various abilities. So they do try to add some more strategy elements in there as well, and it does help to shake up the core gameplay loop a bit. But my problem here is that I've never really liked roguelikes all that much, so they just kind of bleed together for me, and this is one of the ones that really does kind of bleed together. It's not a bad one by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, I'd say it's one of the higher quality ones out there, so if you're looking for a roguelike, then you might want to give this one a shot. But I have never really liked that core gameplay loop of go to dungeon, whack stuff in face, get loot, repeat until endgame. I do tend to tolerate that a lot more in a roguelike than I do in something like Diablo, because roguelikes are generally not thought of as games you play for really long stretches of time. They're the kind of thing you jump into every so often in order to just get a bit further into the dungeon and really just be able to jump out of the game at any time that you feel is necessary. So the fact that that gameplay style is kind of addiction based never really bothered me all that much with roguelikes, partly because most of them are actually free. They're either open source or they're just straight up freeware. This one's in a kind of weird situation where there's a test version available for free on their site, and the fuller version of the game, where you actually have some extra options and such, is available for people who have donated through their site or people who have bought it on Steam. And of course the expansions are available on Steam as well, but it's kind of an odd business model. I'm not entirely sure how it is as surprisingly successful as it is. They do get quite a few donations, and they have had pretty good sales as far as I can tell. And they seem to have quite a dedicated community, which helps them out quite a bit. But again, if you don't like roguelikes, this one isn't really going to persuade you otherwise. If you do like roguelikes, this is one of the better ones out there, and you should probably have it in your collection. But if you're more ambivalent towards roguelikes like I am, then you're going to find that it's probably a better idea to give it a try before you just delve right into the full version of the game. So I will actually provide links in the video description to both the Steam version of the game, which is what you're seeing here again, and the actual developer website, so you can take a look on there for yourself and see if it's actually interesting to you. And that's where all the documentation is as well, so it's pretty handy to take a look at it regardless. But the Steam version is actually rather inexpensive as well, and it actually comes with a ludicrous amount of Steam achievements. Over 1,600 of them. Yes, 1,600 Steam achievements. It's pretty ridiculous, actually. And of course it comes with trading cards and everything as well, and workshop support, which is actually a fairly big deal for this because it being extremely moddable is one of its main selling points. Obviously I didn't mess with any mods for this particular MTO, but that capability is there, and there are quite a few mods available on Steam, so chances are that you can find something you might like. But really the ultimate question is this: do you enjoy roguelikes? Are you looking for a new roguelike, and are you looking for a high quality roguelike? In what experience I have with this thing so far, this pretty much fits that bill, so if that's what you're looking for, then you could do a hell of a lot worse than Tales of Maj'Eyal. But of course, if you're like me and full-on roguelikes really aren't your thing, but you're okay with playing them on occasion, then you might want to hold off on it, or at least try the test version before you consider actually buying the full version, simply because it may or may not really tickle your fancy. As I've mentioned before, I have gone through a few characters in it so far, but I'm really not that far into the plot from what I've run into so far anyway. And I don't really see myself playing this thing for longer than maybe 10 to 15 minute stretches at a time, simply because that's the way I play roguelikes. I don't really delve into them and play them for hours and hours and hours on end. I play them more as a quick time waster for when I'm just working on something and I've decided to compile it, or I'm uploading something or something like that, where I just need some quick diversion, and a roguelike fits that bill because they're really not all that intensive. Sure, there's a lot of stats to worry about, sure there's a lot of underlying mechanics, and sure there's a lot of items that you'll pick up that have lots of enchantments on them that can mess around with things. But generally speaking, I don't consider a roguelike the kind of game you can just sit there and play for hours and hours and hours on end, not something that's really an intensive gaming kind of game. And looking at it from that perspective, Tales of Maj'Eyal is, again, a very high quality example of the genre. It doesn't do anything to really alter that perception of the genre enough to where I would actually try to play it for hours and hours and hours on end. But if that's your jam, then go right ahead and pick this thing up. As I mentioned before, I will have links in the video description box to where you can pick this thing up. Thanks for watching.